Okay, so you're GMing your favorite role-playing game, and a character at the table tosses a grappling hook up to a cliff face, holding onto the rope, but they fail on the check. Can they try again? The answer to this question, which was submitted by a listener on this channel, it's at the heart of good role-playing, good DMing, and good game design. Let's jump in right now. So in this video, I'm going to talk about skill checks primarily, but don't let that fool you. Whatever your role-playing game is, maybe you're playing D&D and it really is skill checks, but maybe you're playing something else like tests in the game of Draw Steel or an action roll in Daggerheart, my book's downstairs, ability checks in older D&D editions, and so on. It all still applies. And even, in fact, this question came from a game. It was a question that sparked this video, came from the video I did on a 5-room learn to play of Pirate Borg, which has no skills. It just has ability tests. All of it still applies here. So just, when you hear me say skill check, convert that to the currency of your game. Okay, so on that video for Pirate Borg 5-room learn to play, the question came in. The player has fashioned some kind of grappling hook and wants to toss it to hook onto a rock to try and climb. So you ask for a presence test, which is what the mechanic uses for ranged attacks, so that's fine. I might have said strength, but either way is great. Using the presence ability, yep, to see if they succeed in throwing the rope to attach to the rock, and they fail the test. From a storyline perspective, they could try several times to get it hooked on the rock. So how do you allow for skill checks on actions that could realistically be attempted several times? Oh, this is awesome. And at first blush, this seems to be a simple question of maybe whether a skill check can be attempted only once. Most games that are out there will say, no, you can't. If you try to pick a lock and you fail, that means the lock is too hard for you to pick, right? That's the explanation that we sort of buy into. So you can't try again. You weren't good enough for this lock. I liked an older D&D edition suggested that if you gain a level, you could try again at that lock, like you're going to come back or something. I thought that was hilarious. And it's interesting because a lot of what's happening here with this lock picking is we are just sort of accepting an explanation for gameplay benefit, right? Because, truth is, a lot of locks, you might fail to pick it the first time and try again, right? Especially an old mechanical lock, and you mess with it more, and eventually you could. If it's pickable and you have skill, you probably would eventually succeed. But we just accept that you can't. In the same way that if one of us tried to use, a credit card to slip into a door jam and unlock the door, if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. That's not, that door is protected against that. And so you can't, right? So we adopt this mentality even for lockpicks in fantasy games to just make for better gameplay. And that's important to keep in mind. Because generally it's a safe bet to say you can't try again when you fail a check. And it's for that reason of gameplay. Even if we could sit there for an hour tinkering with a lock, that's not fun. We don't want that. So we just accept that you can only try once. Now, I didn't find anything in Pirate Borg that says that you can't try multiple times, but it's still a general good way to adopt it. And what happens in this question, and why I love this question so much, is we've got a rope and a grappling hook. We're tossing it up to catch onto a rocky surface. It feels like that should succeed eventually, right? Yeah, we've been out there in some situation where you had to toss something onto something or pull something out of a branch or something. And if you just try long enough, eventually it'll work. So this is where we get into the question of what a check is, what failure is, what success is, and how that situation matters. So I like how Draw Steel has some really nice language for this, for what they call skill tests. When you are making a test, they give you the following guidance. The director should ask a player to make a test only when the player's hero attempts a task where the consequences of failure are interesting or dramatic, and where failure won't grind the story to a halt. And that's really neat, right? And they further say, if a hero wants to leap over a waist-high wall while casually walking through a peaceful city neighborhood, the worst case for the failure is probably that the hero falls on their butt, takes no damage, and can stand up to either try again or walk around the wall. As such, no test is required. And I think that's a great example because a lot of us as DMs, we might actually call for that check, but they're right. It sort of doesn't matter, right? Like you can hop a waist high wall. Like even if you have to try a couple times, nobody cares. And then they say, but if the hero were being chased by enemies, failing to leap over the wall means the pursuers can catch them. So the director might decide to call for a test to determine what happens. And that's really the point here, right? If you are running a game and a situation in your game where failure impacts you, then it matters, right? So one way to look at this question of what happens with the grappling hook is, hey, if you're just sitting on the beach, right? And you have fashioned this grappling hook and there is no time pressure whatsoever, this probably shouldn't be a check. So it's not even a question of whether you can try to re-roll a skill check. You're not rolling a skill check at all because there is no drama or excitement or interesting failure here is a possible way to look at it, right? Now, we might instead say, no, actually, the point of this is that failure is interesting. Failure could have a variety of impacts. Maybe we say, hey, this scenario where you're trying to climb up the rock cliff with this grappling hook is because you're being chased by zombies. The zombie horde is coming and you've found this wall. You grab or fashion this crude grappling hook, toss it up there, and are trying to get up before the zombies arrive. Now, if you failed, what does that mean? Now it's interesting, right? There is a pressure situation. And even if in a game like Pirate Borg, where we are doing things often very like creatively we're responding to the emergent play situation. Random things can happen. Like we might randomly roll that there is a zombie horde heading your way, right? And so the DM might be making this decision off the cuff, right? But when it comes to this, we want to think with this mindset of, okay, failure should be interesting. There should be consequences. Otherwise, it's not a check. There is a zombie horde coming at you. So what should happen? Well, maybe you essentially would break things into rounds and we say, all right, on the first round, you make that attempt. You failed. The zombies are now on you and they attack one of the characters because it's just arriving, right? So you make one zombie attack against a character. All right, next round, make the check again. Now, if you succeed, you can climb up there and maybe there's one last attack because there are 6 characters or however many climbing up the rope. So maybe you want there to be a little more teeth. Or maybe you just say, no, okay, you succeeded the second round, you all scamper up the rope and everything's fine. But if fail that second time, maybe everybody gets a zombie bite attack until you succeed and everybody can exit the scene via climbing up the rope. So that is an example of how we can deal with that question of failure and assign failure to a situation like this. Another example would be, let's say that the heroes are trying to climb up to this cliff face or up this rock or whatever it is, because on the other side, your enemies are going to come and you're going to mount an ambush, right? So you're trying to get there fast enough to set up the ambush in time. So that's where, again, failure becomes interesting. If you can't get this quickly, then the ambush maybe can't set up or won't be as good. And so we might say, all right, you try to climb up, you failed. Maybe you can't set up the ambush, or maybe the ambush is now a disadvantage on checks. Maybe the ambush is less effective, right? We make that ruling to create a reasonable expectation of why there is success and failure here and why it matters to climb that up and make this exciting, right? And that's at the heart of what we're doing here gameplay-wise, right? We are creating exciting situations, not just arbitrary ones, right? We don't just make you roll to climb a cliff face when we don't care what happens. It has to be interesting or dramatic, or failure matters. We can also decide that you only get a single attempt and failure is still interesting because it drives a different option. So for example, if you're trying to get up there to either escape the zombie horde or to go up and set up your ambush site and you fail, we might say as DM, director, GM, I'm sorry, you can't. You failed. You don't climb up the cliff face. What else do you do? And this is a particularly great question to ask in Pirate Borg because Pirate Borg is full of improvisational random situations. And it's kind of neat for the players to jump into that mentality as well. So that's where they might say, oh, maybe we can swim around, or we can hide behind the rocks and let the zombie horde pass. And these kinds of ideas, and they might even be more clever ideas like, you know what, I have a chicken in my backpack. I'm going to throw it and try to distract the zombie horde, you end up with shenanigans happening, right? Like wild player ideas that could go one way or the other. And interesting play emerges because of that failure. So failure is great when it drives a choice or another option or shapes the story, because now we're all being surprised by what's taking place at the table, and that can be a lot of fun. What does failure mean? When we call for a skill check, we want, as DM, to establish clear stakes. The zombie horde is coming. You need to hurry. That's why you're making this check, right? And so going back to that original question, I want to know the why of it. A rope is being thrown up with a grappling hook. Why? What are we trying to do, right? Clear stakes allow us to resolve that failure. You are trying to get there before the zombie horde arrives. If you fail, there are repercussions from that zombie horde, right? And under pressure, that failure drives it impacts based on the stakes, and it helps us as DM know what's going on. If there are no stakes, we could still have some sort of situation where, let's say the player just says, hey, we're standing here on this beach and in this Borg game, and I want to climb up that cliff face. So I'm going to fashion this, grappling hook and toss it up there to climb up. And I, as DM, might say, okay, why are you doing that? And they may say, well, we just shipwrecked on this island, so I want to use the grappling hook to climb up to see whether I can see any landmarks. Now, because of what the player has said, we can understand the stakes. The stakes are really, can you climb up this cliff face, which may or may not be dangerous or hard to climb or whatever? And can you see these landmarks to begin orienting where you need to go based on the larger story, assuming there is one? And that calls for our judgment as DM, right? Maybe we decide, yeah, this is totally cool. There's no danger. You can just climb up, and here are the landmarks you see. Love your idea. Great ingenuity. In fact, I might even reward you and give you a devil's luck point, an advantage point, because you came up with this neat idea. Or I might simply, your reward might be, you just got to see the following landmarks. This is really cool. That's a great way to run it. Because your players now, all of them at the table go, oh, you know what? When we come up with cool ideas like that and use the landscape and come up with, neat concepts, we might get rewards this way. So that's fine. Or maybe we do call for a check and to see whether they can get this benefit, right? So I will give you a check because maybe this can be scaled, maybe it can't. Even though there is no pressing danger, the drama could be in whether this good idea comes off, right? Because now I understand the stakes of what you're trying to do with taking a look around. So that is your success failure moment. And if you failed, hey, you know what? Your skill with the grappling hook seems to have abandoned you. It might take a few minutes or it might take hours. And I might make this a character moment. What does your character do? Does your character just keep doing this while other characters are doing other things, trying until they eventually succeed? Or do you try something else, right? And that can be a nice thing where the failure is not about, you still can attain it eventually, but we're digging into that idea that over time you will succeed. But is that what your character does? And they might go, yeah, that's what I do. And that's fine. And now we give them the landmarks that they see. Or we can shift where the check is. Maybe you say, you know what? Climbing up there, there's no pressure. You can get up there and look. But once you get up there, all the landmarks are pretty far away, or there is a deep fog in the area. And maybe based on that, we say, I need to get a presence check to see whether you can see these landmarks. That might be fun, or it might not. Again, it depends on the type of reward you're trying to do and the type of interaction, your campaign, your approach. You do want to reward good ideas. So I think that in general, my advice would be, err on the side of yes, and this happens, and that's great, right? If you want to have some sort of failure point, it probably just isn't to cancel out their good idea, but to make things interesting in play while still rewarding their initiative, right? The idea that they took initiative on making this check to begin with. Another question is whether failure is a problem in the adventure. Let's say that they're trying to get in this adventure from A to B, from the beach to the jungle on this island that they've shipwrecked onto. And there's cliff face in the way. When they make that check and fail, is that a problem? Like, does it mean that they can no longer get to area B, right? Let's do it another way. Let's imagine that we've got a door to a dungeon, right? The adventure is inside and the door is locked. And the character that is the most roguelike, and let's say this is a game where you must be trained in thievery tools in order to get in. And so you use your thieves' tools, you try to open the lock, and you fail. Is the adventure over, right? That's an example of a gatekeeping check where we have actually really hurt play, right? Doors tend to be the most common design problem with this. They happen even in official D&D adventures and shouldn't, because we as designers and editors and developers should catch these things, but it happens, right? We have put the fun in the adventure behind a gate, and if you fail, you can't get to the fun. And that is a major problem in design, right? And so as DMs, we want to recognize that. If we said that the goal is to get from place A to B, and the only way is by succeeding at this check, it shouldn't be a check, right? We have like really messed up our players. Like we've given them something that's not fun if they fail. And so there should not be a check. It should be either that, yes, in fact, you can keep trying until you succeed, and so we don't make a check. You just tell me how you're getting up there, right? Maybe this is a character moment. Again, how do your characters choose to go up this cliff? Or there should be options. Yes, you failed at this, but you can swim around, but that's dangerous because you've heard rumors that there are sharks in the water, right? And so that's where you get into the failure is not an endpoint. It drives options and choices. There can be situations where we want to have success not be possible, right? So just like we can think about what happens if they fail and does everything end? Well, we may sometimes say, no, actually, it is an endpoint. You cannot climb this cliff face. The cliff face is too crumbly. It's too dangerous. You cannot. And so it's impossible, right? You cannot get past this barrier. And the reason is because there are other fun ways to interact with the environment, right? There are other things you're expected to do. And so you must find those, right? And so in this case, think of it as sort of being like looking around your environment. Ooh, can I deal with the cliff face? No, that's impassable. Ooh, could I traverse through the water? Yeah, you think that is possible. There are some sharp rocks, and now we get into a different type of play, right? But we want to be really careful about when we do that and why we're doing that. Why are we putting this impassable barrier over to one side? Maybe it is because the whole point is to go along the coastline. So the cliff face is crumbly and unsafe. And you know that you must walk around the water because we've got a lot of fun that we've designed with giant crabs and kraken tentacles and who knows what. And so going along the coastal path is what's expected. We've often talked here about success or failure as one or the other, like an on-off switch. But a neat way to handle a lot of these questions and this type of situation is with degrees of success or failure. It's a very nice way as a DM on the fly to come up with an answer for your player. So the player might say, hey, I want to climb up this cliff. And we're like, oh, wow, we didn't expect someone to climb the cliff. Yeah, the zombie horde's coming. I thought you were going to run into the water, but the cliff is pretty neat. And if you can get up there, well, the zombies won't be able to do that. So it's actually really smart. But maybe I want to make this a little more interesting. And I dig into almost what 4th edition D&D did with skill challenges, right? Where you would make a series of checks to see how things went. And this also happens in Draw Steel. There's something called a montage where you can have a series of checks that determine success. Draw Steel itself, actually baked into how it works, has the idea of, and this comes from many other role-playing games before it, success that is tiered. And so you might have a success. You might have a success with a complication. You might have a failure with some sort of a reward, right? And that can be very interesting if you've played the Edge of the Empire Star Wars. It uses systems like this. And these systems are also influenced by role-playing games that came before them, particularly in the indie gaming space, that come up with these ideas of having complications or successes, Apocalypse World and many others. So we could think about, all right, you want, the zombie horde's coming. You decided you want to use this climbing up on a grappling hook. So if you succeed on the first try, you get a great success and you can climb up before the zombies. Or I might even say, if you roll over X, right, you make this difficulty of a test, whether it's an ability test or check or whatever, you're succeeding this well means you get up before the zombies. Full success, great reward, no problem. Succeeding after 1 or 2 rounds might mean each character is attacked once. Succeeding after 3 rounds, and you get the picture, some sort of thing like that. Or we might say, Every failure that you make represents trouble as you're climbing and you get banged up. So we could use this idea of degrees of success and failing with complication, succeeding with a complication, failing with a reward, and set up something like, okay, you know what? I'm going to make you do 3 rolls as you set the grappling hook and climb up. If you succeed on all 3 rolls, you take no damage climbing up, you reach the top, and everybody who follows you, they only have to make 2 checks instead of the 3. If you get 2 successes out of the 3 on the way up, you take no damage and you reach the top, and then your friends can do the same thing, right? Or if you only make a single success, you take some damage, you do reach the top, and maybe you give advantage to somebody on their next try, the next person to follow you. If you fail all 3 rolls, you get banged up and reach the top only after taking all this damage. And then the next person has to try, right? So that's just the kind of thing that we could create. And this is not meant to be a perfect system, but it's something you might come up with on the fly that is reasonable and introduces this concept of degrees of success. Now, I want to go back and talk about multiple checks for success, because that's something of this idea with degrees of success. We do have to be very careful with multiple checks. I have seen games where a player says, I want to climb that cliff face to get a look around and look for landmarks. And the GM says, okay, every 10 feet, it's 30 feet high, every 10 feet, make me a climb check. And the problem is, even when you have a pretty good chance of success, doing that 3 times, that's a recipe for disaster. And in fact, I was watching this game, and sure enough, they fell at the 3rd check and fell to their death. Their character was not dead, but unconscious. And, it's like, well, you kind of set this up, DM. You set them up to fail because making a number of checks in a row is very hard. So that's why in the example, I chose that all 3 checks failed still means you get to the top, because it's a question of how you got to the top, not if, and how banged up you are and whether you help other people. So we want to be careful about something that creates a failure state through multiple checks, because multiple checks will almost always give us at least 1 failure, right? The odds just start being too much in the favor of failure. And so we can just expect that that's going to happen. When we are doing multiple checks, we have to be really careful that we didn't suddenly create a situation that just guarantees very bad results and punishing results, right? Because again, we want characters to do cool things, to feel like heroes, and to have reasonable chances at success when they're doing something that should be possible, right? Otherwise, just say, no, you can't. You look at that cliff face and you say, there's no way, I'm not going to climb up that. You know that you would eventually fall and it would probably be a really bad thing, so you're not going to climb up there, right? You can't see the landmarks from here. And that is what we're choosing to say, because that's the state of the world and what the adventure world expects. Now, maybe they can fly, and then, hey, we have to just say, okay, here are the landmarks that you see, because that's the way it is. But at least we make that decision that you can't climb the cliff face. When we are DMing on the fly and situations come up, it's hard to make choices that are always perfect. So don't be hard on yourself, right? When I looked at this question, it had an interesting bit of phrasing where it talked about a character has fashioned a grappling hook. And when I think about that question in its purest form, right? So here is a character fashioning a grappling hook, then trying to repeatedly climb up the cliff face, which makes sense. And so maybe here, where the check should have been in this original question, is in the fashioning, right? Make me a check to craft this grappling hook. If you succeed, it can hold your weight. You can climb up without needing to make another check, right? And that could be, it's a thing to think about as DMs, that we may not quite realize where the check should be. It isn't always where you think. We might think it's the climb, but maybe actually the more interesting part is the question of whether your character can craft this grappling hook that'll hold. And, in terms of consequences, maybe the issue is, well, I failed to craft this. So what'll end up happening is I'm going to climb without the rope and without the grappling hook, which will make it a harder climb. Do you still want to do that? If not, you could go along the coastal path, though, of course, you have heard those waters are shark infested. As I was thinking about this video, I happened to run into Seth Skorkowski's video on charisma and social encounters and his Running RPGs series. And it's a really good video that complements this one well. He covers a lot of other topics. Primarily, he's looking at the idea of NPC characters and NPCs interacting and how to resolve those situations. But a lot of that logic applies to this, and he ends up actually covering a lot of these topics as well. Highly recommended to check that out. There you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you to folks who leave questions on these videos. It's really neat to think about them, and you never know when something you comment down below could lead into a video like this. So thank you, and a huge thanks to all of my Patreon members who help make these videos possible. Got a lot planned for this year, so stay tuned. Thanks again for supporting me, and I'll see you next time.